rabbis with us today, one from Miami Beach, one from Kendall Pinecrest area. Yep. Welcome. And if you would introduce first on Zoom, Rabbi from Miami Beach, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Michael. I'm Rabbi Ethan Bair. I have the honor of serving Temple Beth Shalom on Miami Beach, a large Reform congregation on the beach, and take an active role in our social justice engagement.
Good. We're gonna be talking about that in just a minute. I was raised as a Unitarian, even though I came from Jewish parents, and now my wife brought me back into the tribe. So it's been an interesting journey. And if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Rabbi Rachel Greengrass. I currently serve at Temple Beth Am in Pinecrest, and right now I also have the privilege of being the president of the Rabbinical Association of Greater Miami.
Oh my goodness gracious. All right. My affiliation happens to be with some of the Chabads around town. So, and I'm delighted that you're here today, especially we have an upcoming holiday
yes,
for
happy
everybody
Passover.
to celebrate. But we're going to talk about the Religious Action Center. Why don't you tell us what that's all about and some of the projects that you've worked on and that you will be working on? Rabbi.
Take it away.
So the Religious Action Center, or as we call it for short, the RAC, is the social justice advocacy arm of the Reform movement. So people often think of, worship and prayer and life cycle events when you think of religion, but as Jewish people, our faith calls us to do justice in the world and to work towards perfecting the world. And so with that comes a lot of social justice work and sometimes working with politicians to make our communities better.
And how long have you been involved with RAC?
Well, actually, I've been involved with RAC since I was 15 years old. But in my capacity as a rabbi, I think, even during rabbinical school, I worked with the Religious Action Center.
And one of the things, Rabbi, on the RAC involves young people and training leaders of the lives and of the state and of the country and of the world, and you get them involved. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, absolutely, education is embedded into everything we do as rabbis and in the Jewish community, of course. And so one of the trips that Rabbi Greengrass just alluded to, and probably when she was 15, I don't know, we take our sophomores in high school on a trip every year to DC to learn how to lobby and how to put our Jewish values into action with elected leaders, and that's always a very meaningful part of their confirmation year.
And just for some folks that are not aware, that young people can also go to Israel. All right. Tell us about that, Rabbi.
We really want our young people to connect with their faith in every way through prayer, action, and peoplehood and the land. So there's really some wonderful opportunities to travel to Israel. We have here in Miami, we actually started the Alexander Muss High School in Israel program where our teens can actually take a whole semester, first, second, or a summer semester and study in Israel. We also have through the Reform Jewish movement, we have summer teen programs through NIFTY and other study groups. And then there's this phenomenal program, which really is for anybody who has any Jewish connections. So you could have gone, even though you were raised Unitarian Universalist.
I know it's still hard for me to say it, but we'll give it a shot.
But a wonderful church who partners with us a lot, actually, in our social justice work.
Oh, yes.
But there's something called Birthright, which is a really phenomenal opportunity for anybody actually up to 32 years old to travel to Israel, really expense-free, to have that opportunity to go to the land, to see where our ancestors walked, connect, and really talk to people locally about the justice issues there.
And one of the things I've recognized as I'm getting close to 60 is sometimes you have responsibilities and then sometimes you have obligations. And the Jewish people, and I use that term broadly, I sense a sense of obligation to make sure as best we can that people are treated fairly. And it's not just, well, I might go do that, because when my children both went to Israel, and to watch them blossom and understand that, you sense this change that has occurred. So my hat's off to the people that help fund that and the people that make that keep progressing. So tell us about RAC and how it got started here in Florida, and how do you get more people involved in it? And if we could, why don't you touch on some of the issues that you're working on now? Rabbi.
Rabbi Bair, you want to?
Okay. So RAC Florida, as Rabbi Greengrass said, it's the RAC is our social justice arm for the reform movement, and RAC Florida is the 8th state that has a dedicated state chapter, because we have 57 Reform congregations across the state and a lot of Reform Jews in our state, and that comes with a fair amount of power. So we are new to really organizing that power within our state. And for us, our first campaign was working on Amendment 4, which restored voting rights to returning citizens in the state. I'm sure you know all about that, and a really important bipartisan effort. And then we've also been involved with immigration justice issues, closing the child detention center in Homestead. We were part of the protest movement there with immigrant justice partners, and civic engagement in the last election, making sure that people were going to the polls, whoever they were voting for. And now our focus is really in opposing HB1 SB 484, the anti-protest bill that we think is really worrisome, because it will silence peaceful protesters and could chill dissent and intimidate those people who are most vulnerable in our community from speaking out. So we're really concerned about the First Amendment, our First Amendment rights to assembly and speech and religion, and we know how dangerous it can be when communities are silenced, and especially communities of color and Jewish community allies, and everyone trying to speak out and make their voices heard.
So we know that a lot of people that are in prison, and for many years, are African American. What is the connection, and why is this strong connection between the prisoners, former prisoners, all right, the voting rights, African Americans, and why is this connection so strong over so many decades?
You asked about the origins of the Religious Action Center. So the first race relations and summit on race was really our Passover story, right? Moses coming to Pharaoh and saying, you have to let this people go. But the origins of the Religious Action Center itself actually has its history here in Florida, of all places. Kivy Kaplan came to Florida for vacation and saw a sign as in front of a hotel that said, "No kikes, no dogs." And Kivy,
what year was that?
It must have been. It was in the 50s, and Kivy Kaplan asked the cab driver, who happened to be African American, "What is this?" And he said, "At least you made the sign." And so Kivy Kaplan gave money in Washington, D.C. to create a building, to have a home to speak justice to power, to give our religious voice to those in Washington, D.C. And it was in that room, really, that the Civil Rights Act was drafted. Because it's not just a home for the Jewish community and for justice, but it is a home for everybody who wants to work towards justice. And a lot of that justice has to do with really unraveling systematic racism and the role that has played in our society. I happen to, my brother-in-law is an officer of the law. He actually works for the federal government. So, but he's a man in uniform. I love police, and I grew up having an affinity. But I also grew up with white skin. And there is a history of that I had to learn about in terms of the police being connected to the Klan and having and the transition from slavery to prisoners doing work that is so connected that we have to work to really unravel. So when you ask about, the history of our work within the criminal justice movement, and our work within the racial justice movement, those, of course, are going to be intertwined. And, the Jewish people are fortunate right now in America that most people view us as being white. And when I say us, I should say like Jews come in every color. There's Asian Jews, African American Jews, just every, it's a religion. So it doesn't.
And the Miami Cuban Jews.
So we have a huge Miami Cuban Jewish community.
Let's talk about the Amendment 4,
Yes.
where it gave voting rights back to formerly incarcerated prisoners. And then the state hurried up and then appealed the law, which said you have to pay anything that you might owe, all right, in order for you to get to have your rights restored to vote. Rabbi, what ultimately occurred with that, so that these people who were incarcerated, that wanted to go vote, so they could still have that right to go do that? Ultimately, what happened?
Well, I think that our state tried to chip away at the people's will, because that was a ballot initiative where a strong majority, supermajority of Floridians said, this is archaic. This is the idea that someone with a 3rd-degree felony, and it's like can get a felony in Florida pretty easily, unfortunately, would be barred from voting for their whole life. That makes no sense. It's clearly part of Florida's problematic past, right, with the history of racism in our state and in the South. And unfortunately, the will of the people was not fully respected. I think what happened is that people who had any outstanding fees or outstanding fines, even if they were kind of administrative and not related to the felony that they had a conviction for, would still be barred from voting. And it's been challenged and it's been in the courts, but there's still, unfortunately, just a fraction of the people who should have been re-enfranchised who can vote now. So everyone in this state who's a citizen should be able to have a voice in our elections, and no one should be intimidated, and certainly no one should be barred from it because of having done something long ago in their past when they've done the repentance, they've done teshuva, we say, for that crime, and served them in prison.
I want to add that, it really translates to a poll tax, because people who have financial means, they're going to be able to restore their rights to vote. And I think one of the things we learned during this campaign, that people who grow up in Florida and know this to be the law thinks that this is how it is, but that Florida was only one of 3 states that had this rule, and that other states either automatically restore your civic rights or they never take them away in the first place.
And we're seeing as the country moves forward, we see the laws changing on marijuana use and possession. I think it's a perfect example where during the 60s, a lot of people went to prison for small amounts of marijuana, and there for a long time. And we look, and now the laws are completely different, to where it's not even an issue anymore that there's a dispensary down the street. It's like no one really cares anymore. Now, Chris Wolf does a show here called Men Coming Home, and where he mentors prisoners that have been incarcerated for at least 25 years. We've had the good fortune of meeting some of these folks and who've been in there. And these folks do need a mentor to help them move from over here get out, and certainly getting their voting rights back is part of them being part of society and not feeling ostracized. All right, and it's sort of like a precondition for getting insurance, and you have this little problem and you couldn't get it before, and you felt separated from that. And
Absolutely, it's a renewal of dignity for sure.
Yes. Yeah. When my father took me in 1965 or 66, maybe 67, to St. Augustine where the marches were going on. So I'm like, I won't tell you how old I was, but I was young, and I couldn't figure out what these black people had done to these white people that were beating them up. It's just like, I'm going, why are they doing that? All right. And I realized recently, in the past 20 years or so, of this connection between good-hearted people, when you see who marched with the blacks, all right? And a lot of them were religious leaders, including Jewish leaders. And when you watch that, people need each other to get this stuff done so that we can all feel equal, all right, under the law, which we have a long way to go. And Howard Dixon, who was a friend of my father's in the 60s and 70s, was with the ACLU. And we had friends that were in NAACP. And I couldn't quite figure out this connection that my father and my mother had to African Americans and to minorities and for standing up. And I knew that it was because of their upbringing and standing up for, themselves. And it turns out my father was on, he had a radio show called The Gospel Train, all right? On WMI and WEDR in the 60s, and I used to go there. And the infinity that my brother Glenn and I have for helping people, all right, especially people that need help, all right, is just ingrained so deeply with us. And I know that was from my upbringing and the bigger picture of where we came from. A doctor the other day said to me, "Where are you from, Michael?" And I said, "I'm from here." She said, "No, where are you from?" Mm. And I understood it clearly. I said, "From Ukraine." And she said, "I knew that," right? By talking to her. And so the essence of who we are as people comes through at times like this. So my hat's off to RAC and to yourselves for making this work better for everybody. So let's talk about the HB1, which the governor of our state, DeSantis, put forth. Let's talk about some of the penalties that he wants to, or that's been imposed on some of the people speaking out for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you just shared that story about being at that protest in St. Augustine, because I think a lot of us have formative memories, either of physically ourselves being at protests or in our people's history, right? So we're going to really relive the Seder, which is a protest and a revolution and an exodus. But I think of my grandparents. I have one set of my grandparents met in a DP camp. They were survivors of the Holocaust, and the other set met on the picket line. And it is like part of our blood and part of who we are, that when we see injustice, that we stand up. And it's part of the Jewish faith and teaching that we can't stand idly by. And so even if our voices are going to fall on deaf ears, we're still supposed to speak out, or else we are held accountable. So we're very worried about HB1 because it's trying to limit protest. There are already laws on the books. When we use the expression, my mom read me the Riot Act, right? There actually is a Riot Act. So these laws are completely unnecessary. And they were really in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, even though the governor DeSantis is using right now the protests that happened in DC, which those were not protests. That was a riot, an insurrection. But Rabbi Bair, I know you can share some of the details about this bill.
Yeah, sure. So specifically, as Rabbi Greengrass just said, it creates a new felony called committing a riot for merely being present at a protest that turns violent or destructive. And even if those not engaging in any violent activity can be charged. So rioting is already a third-degree felony, as she said, punishable up to 5 years, making this unnecessary. This bill would embolden counter-protesters by allowing them to escape civil liability for killing or injuring a protester with a gun or a car. So this would potentially exonerate people like the white supremacist who drove his car into protesters in Charlottesville, killing Heather Heyer. And it encourages more militaristic police action. This is not something that sheriffs or police chiefs are asking for. And I think that's a really important point. And so it really is more of the governor trying to create his own political cred and resume rather than creating law that is needed. We don't need more militaristic police action. Mandates overnight jail time for minor offenses. And it's unnecessary because Florida already addresses unlawful assembly violence, property damage, and violence directed as law enforcement in riots. So, what we're most concerned about is the way that this would intimidate people who want to protest and make their voices heard, including vulnerable communities of color, communities that we are very much in partnership with and allyship with in Florida. Rabbi Greengrass and I, as part of RAC Florida, were very much involved with showing up to protest the child detention center in Homestead when the Trump administration opened that on federal land, a for-profit detention center. And we really cemented relationships with the immigrant justice community, people who have been fighting for their own community's rights. And so we know that those kinds of protests that we brought community members to, and that we protested many times outside of that detention center, that kind of thing, we might feel, the community might feel intimidated to do that kind of thing if this passes, because of how unnecessary and overreaching this bill would be.
So in an extreme, if there were a group of 200 people and the front 50 people broke out into a riot, the remaining people might be able to be brought in and charged with the same crime that those people who were breaking the windows and breaking into buildings.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be the front 50 people. It can just be the front 3 people. So that's what is so scary. As Rabbi Bair just shared, when we were in Homestead, we had 2 of the days that we organized and we came and protest were Mother's Day and Father's Day. And I can't tell you how powerful it was holding my son's hand, his little hand, and marching around this detention center, trying to send love to these kids inside who were separated from their families and from anybody who cares about them, and holding the hand of my child. But as a mother, would I go if there's a possibility that I'm going to be thrown in prison for a night? Who's going to take my child? What's going to happen to him? Is the state going to take my, there's, so it's really limiting our First Amendment rights.
It's a subtlety of that law that keeps the people from going, well, should I go? Should I not go? I don't want to take a chance, because even if I'm found not guilty, right, to go through the grief for a day, a week, a month, or 5 months, or whatever it is, the energy, the bandwidth, the money, the separation, right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously that's what Big Brother does in order to intimidate us to stop doing stuff way in advance, right? Because we teach our kids, don't hang out with those people, because that's what's going to happen. So in this case, it is for social justice, and you might pay a huge price, even if you in yourself you were still complying with the rules. So tell us about young people that are involved with RAC. What causes them to be involved and to stay involved, and what sort of projects are they able to work on?
That's a great question. I think so. I know that Rabbi Greengrass and I both at our synagogues have fellowships about social justice and Judaism with teenagers, and they're very much involved in our campaigns. One issue that they have been very turned on by, because they know how close to home it can be, is gun violence prevention. And I know some of our teens, many of our teens, were part of the March for Our Lives protests, and they look to that as a really meaningful experience of what it can mean to show up and to voice to voice their values in the public sphere. Yeah, so they come with us to legislative meetings and to meet with. We just had a meeting this week with Senator Pizzo, our state senator, so that they could voice their concern about what this means to them, if they wouldn't be able to protest, given how important it is to them as Jews. As Jews, we historically have been part of many protest movements, from the civil rights movement to the movement to free Soviet Jewry, and more recently, gun violence prevention, women's rights, immigrant rights, Black Lives Matter. And we're a people that protests. As Rabbi Greengrass said, this is the week before Passover. This is when Moses leads a protest movement leading to our ancestors' liberation from bondage. And we are commanded to see ourselves as if each of us comes out of Egypt every Passover. Queen Esther led a hunger strike to raise awareness among the Jewish people about Haman's plot to destroy us. The Talmud obligates us to protest whenever we encounter injustice. And peaceful protest in the public square is a tool that every modern liberation struggle has used. The peaceful, innocent protester should not be criminalized for actions of the few. And so this is important to our teenagers. This is important to all of us.
So how does RAC and its members, able to go on both sides of the aisle without alienating groups of people, saying, listen, this side, you need to look at this, and then the other side, and to be able to separate it from partisan politics, which is what they do, all right? So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that's very important to remember, that there's a difference between politics, right, which is the art of governing and getting things done, versus being partisan. So one of the ways we do this is how we train and frame things. We look to our holy scriptures. We look to our books, where God very much paints an ideal world, right, where we love our neighbors as ourselves, right, where there's one law for you and the stranger, where justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. So we have this ideal of a society. We've never reached to that point. But whenever we speak about an issue, we start with two texts. So the first text is our text, the Hebrew scriptures. What in our faith informs us on this issue, and the other text is the text of our lives. So as Rabbi Bair just reminded us, we had a lot of our teens participate in the, March for Our Lives. I was actually, besides being heartbroken, I'm very proud of the synagogues in Parkland who brought their teens that same week to Tallahassee to tell their stories. And they used the formula that we use, where they said, this is my story. I want to say it's their Torah, but that's their lived experience. I went to school. I was traumatized. I lost a friend. And we as a public, we experience this as a freak accident and we move on. These kids' lives are changed forever. They have nightmares for years. Some of them took their lives afterward. It's not a one and done situation. So they know that I'm going to tell my personal story. Nobody can argue with my personal story. My personal story is not partisan. I'm going to share my Jewish text. Nobody can argue with my Jewish text. It is not partisan. And now I'm going to ask you something. And I think that on both sides of the aisle, we would agree that mass shootings are a problem. We've had 2 horrific ones just this past week in Atlanta and in Denver. But we have had many more that don't make the headlines. So everybody agrees this is a problem. What we don't agree on is the solution. But I think that's part of it, is remembering that even if we don't vote the same, we have the same core values, in that we want safety. We want our children to be happy and loved and safe and educated. We want, health. We want freedom. We want our rights. It's just how we go about these things that we disagree about.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry.
So, Rabbi, for the young people that have been traumatized, how do you help them be able to tell, as you're saying, their stories? So, number one, so other people know, and number two, so they feel good and empowered that they're able to share that and maybe change not just themselves and not just their personal environment, but change the state and change the country and perhaps change the world. How do you teach them and help them come forth like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think we give them the platform, we give them the permission, and we say that your voice matters. And we start by being able to tell our stories with one another, and then to learn about the Jewish values, as Rabbi Greengrass just articulated so beautifully, that that are very much part of our own stories. And yeah, I mean, I think giving them the tools to learn how to advocate and how powerful their story is. I think it starts with the reinforcement of community, that this is who we are as Jews. Is we're a people of stories, and they're not pie in the sky. They're real and they matter. And everyone should know that their stories matter. And that's exactly what this is about.
Could we talk about COVID for a moment? All right. We know that there's a mental health crisis that is going on, especially with young people. Older people sometimes can rationalize it, but we know that mental health and emotional health is very fragile right now. And as we get out of this, all right, people have experienced huge traumas throughout the world, but young people haven't been through post-traumatic stress, all right, as a lot of us have. So what services, not religious services, but what services does your temple in Miami Beach offer to families and to children who might need somebody to talk to?
Wow, that's a great question. I think we are, they certainly know that clergy are available to talk to, and frankly, sometimes I feel like we haven't to you're saying. I think that what we've reached out to our congregants multiple times throughout the year. Everyone's gotten multiple phone calls just to be checked in on, to know that someone cares. But there's probably a lot more we could do, honestly.
And I would ask you if you do a lot more, because there's some little kid out there that's struggling and talking to his parents or to his friends and not quite sure what to do, and as he's getting emotional and he misses his friends, and is it going to be safe? And tell us what Temple Beth, Beth. Okay.
Yeah. So we, like Rabbi Bair said, of course, the clergy is there for them, and I hope they know that. Every time I have a meeting with a student, I give them my cell phone. I just want them to know that they always have another adult who loves them and who is there to listen and support them. We do refer to and defer to a lot of mental health professionals. We're lucky to, have relationships within the community and to have professionals within the congregation. But another thing that is very helpful when it comes to mental health is feeling powerful. And I think that that's something that, especially at the beginning of COVID, that none of us felt, it was like a loss of all control and power. So we always look for opportunities of where can I have power in this moment? Where can I advocate in this moment? So part of that was figuring out how can we, do social justice work when we're not allowed to see each other. So we did drive-through food drives so that people could help each other. We would let people know if somebody in the congregation is in need of something so that we can really work as a network. But also, to take it back to HB1 and protest, to like think about where is your power in this moment? So yes, a lot of these kids, I'm very sad for our kids, but in Florida, we've been very lucky that a lot of our students have been able to come back in person. Whereas, I look to some of my friends who live in other cities where their kids are still not in school. But one of the things that some students at our school at Temple Beth did was, when we first started coming back, we weren't allowing anybody to touch the same surfaces. So we didn't allow balls on the playground, and you weren't allowed to climb on the equipment.
Yeah.
So that's like you can basically just run in a circle as long as you're like, in a 6-foot orbit from everybody else. And one of the things that our students did was that they advocated for themselves. They didn't have mom and dad call. They organized, spoke truth to power. And, as we learned that, the surface exposure was not as dangerous as we had initially thought, they won the right to play with balls on the playground.
That's wonderful. And we know when you're in your own time of need, by lending a hand and by doing something, it helps. By the way, I wanted to let everybody to know that there's glass between us. See, we're just not in different places. And Rabbi is over on Miami Beach, and Tommy's behind some glass, over there. So here we are, almost April of 2021. All right. What do religious services look like this summer? We'll start over Miami Beach.
That's a great question.
If you were going to project and predict, what is it like?
Well, I know that. I hope this is public already, but I know that in May we are starting to have small numbers of people back in our sanctuary. Very much socially distant, and we're excited for that. And so my hope is that goes well, and that everyone who wants to can sign up for one service at least in May, and then we can build out from there. And it really is just contingent on numbers continuing to go down, and that is very much connected to vaccinations and everything else. So I think it's really still 1 month at a time. But we're looking forward to just beginning that, a year and 2 months into the pandemic. We're planning our first in-person services.
And we're all looking for it. Tell us about what's on the plate, if you will, over at Temple Beth.
Yeah, so we've already begun to have life cycle events in our sanctuary. Everybody is masked and socially distanced, and I think that has been a good kind of model for us in terms of bringing people back to worship in person. But that being said, COVID was very hard, and I think everybody really needed spirituality and religion in a way that they haven't really felt that they have for a while. And the way that we were able to pivot to online, to streaming, to Zoom, to that we have Rabbi Bair zooming in from Miami Beach. The way that we've been able to do that has actually helped a lot of congregants who were homebound and who couldn't come. And I don't think there's ever going to be a full going back. We really have been able to tap into our community in a new and meaningful way. And I would hate to see us just go back to normal and not utilize the tools that we've been able to engage that have helped people who have disability, who are in recovery for something, who are out of town.
Yeah, and especially just to add, I think especially with life cycle events, because we have been having in person, small immediate family in 20 people, up to 20 people in our sanctuary, that we have these huge screens in our sanctuary, and the bar or bat mitzvah can see their family members from all over the world on screen, even people who can't travel. So I think we will, we've learned some of the positive silver linings in all this. For sure.
TV guys have been doing that for years, which is they have a small audience there, and then they shine it out to the world on their TVs.
Right.
And so we certainly see a combination of both. You have two audiences: the ones that's in front of you and the ones that are wherever that happens to be. We know again that this is coming out of COVID. It's a very emotional issue because we realize that we're fortunate not to die, all right? But there have been plenty of people that have, and there's this sadness of like, oh my goodness, what did we just go through in the last year and a half? And maybe at that point, it might be a little bit longer. So do you anticipate having some sort of services where you address those issues about what we've been through and where we are and where we're going to be down the road?
Definitely. I think healing services are something that we do.
There it is. Healing services. Okay.
In Reform Judaism. And, I think it has been, it's like we're in the middle of it now. So it's hard to, where everyone is trying to get by in the ways that they can. But I think that's a beautiful suggestion. I'll definitely take it back.
It's interesting because we were considering doing a after COVID, it will be brighter, and then we realized for whom and when is that appropriate? And we were going to do something in May, and I said, you know what? Maybe that's too soon. All right, maybe it's August, maybe it's September, because so many people are suffering and have suffered. And I hope the people that need somebody to talk to, speak to a counselor, speak to your religious advisor, your spiritual advisor, your parents. If you get like really freaked out, call 211. They will get you to somebody that can help you. There's a national. We have 2 minutes left. National suicide hotlines. Don't do anything stupid. Speak to your friends. If you can't speak to your parents, speak to your school advisors, your principal, your rabbis, your ministers, your priests, and all those people that can help you through this tough time. And it will be brighter. And for you students that miss school, don't worry. At some point, relatively soon, you'll be back in school on the level that you want to be on. And for you folks that want to have a graduation ceremony that's coming up sooner or later, and hopefully it'll be sooner. We're going to wrap it up here. So, Rabbi, what I'd like you to do is tell some young person out there how the future looks. And then Rabbi, also, if you would do the same.
Yeah. So as you know, Passover is this week, but people don't know that the first Seder, we were actually still in bondage, and we ate matzah in bondage. We already sang for our freedom. So I want to just wish all of the young people and all of us, because I know I'm suffering also spiritually, that even when we're in dark places, we can sing songs and we can picture a better future and just hold on to that hope.
And Rabbi?
Beautiful. Yeah, this is Passover this coming weekend, and when we might still yet be just with our immediate families or with relatives over Zoom. We thought a year ago, we probably couldn't imagine that we'd have two Passovers like this. And the beautiful thing about Judaism is that it can happen wherever we are and whoever we're with. And even a Seder you can do by yourself. You have to ask the questions and answer them yourself. But even if it's just with a spouse or a loved one, or if you're alone for Seder, you can still retell the story and you can still learn something new. And I think that's beautiful to end on, a word of hope that we can continue to grow even when we're in dark times and even when the situation is less than ideal. And so, I think our teenagers, a lot of them have tapped into all kinds of resilience inside themselves this year and learned a lot about themselves and had time on their own to think and to grow. And so I hope that all the ways that people have grown in a positive way this year that we can also, infuse that into our lives going forward.
And as we get ready to wrap this up, first, I want to thank Tommy for producing the show. As we're talking, I'm realizing that I'm still very emotional about this, and I'm sense some of that in the crowd that's here, right? And I think it is to be able to recognize that it's still going on within us and for the people that we care about. And on that, we're going to call it a day. Folks, rabbis, thank you very much for joining us. Happy Passover to you and to your families and to everybody out there. Again, this is Live with Community News. Thank you for joining us.